Compromise of 1877 was where the House of Representatives decided to vote for Hayes become president on return for the promise that Hayes would remove the last of the federal troops from the South, and this ended Reconstruction. President Harry Truman later said that my mother never got reconstructed, and that was true of a lot of the Southern people, and she always hated Presidents Lincoln and Grant. By the way, I should have mentioned that President Hayes was a general. The next three presidents after Johnson, Grant and Hayes and Garfield, all three of them were Union generals during the Civil War. Hayes, we'd forget about it if he hadn't become president, because somehow or another he was not involved in the thick of it. But Garfield did some active fighting during the Civil War. But anyway, three presidents in a row were generals. All right. Then the generals got old. Chapter 17. All right. Your book begins with an opening vignette about celebrating the 400th anniversary. Now, I was around to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Columbus in 1992, but in 1882, they celebrated building this little city called White City near Chicago. And then the vignette mentions Buffalo Bill and Buffalo Bill. Well, anyway, the point I wanted to make, folks, is the West caught the imagination of a lot of Americans at that time. Most of you are too young to remember it. In the 1950s, all your evening television shows were Westerns. The Western, I can name some of them. I mean, in the 60s it was about the same thing. By far the most popular show was the Western shows that featured men like Jefferson Drum, 26 Men, Wagon Train, Wyatt Earp, The Lone Ranger, Bonanza, Hopalong Cassidy. Have any of you ever heard of these shows by any chance? A few of them, some of you might have watched them, but they were the going thing. And your Western hero usually carried two guns and usually was real quick on the draw and always on the right side of the law. Some of them were based on real men. Wyatt Earp was a real person, actual person. He had a deputy named Bat Masterson, and Bat Masterson also was real. But they had a TV show about Bat Masterson one time. But a lot of them were not. They had a show about Davy Crockett. Of course, he was Kentucky, I mean. But no, Davy Crockett was Tennessee. But they had a show about Daniel Boone. There was a show about Daniel Boone, again, all fictional. Davy Crockett, also all fictional. Even though Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett were actually real men. But anyway, the Western was a big part of the TV shows at the time. Today, except as reruns, they're rarely showed. Gunsmoke, if you watch the Mead Channel, a lot of those Western shows are showed. Yeah, the one thing about the Mead Channel, it has an innocence that's often lacking. The good guys are actually good, and the bad guys are actually bad. Today, it's more real, I guess. The good guys are half bad, and the bad guys are half good, which is maybe the way the world is in reality, but it doesn't make for us. To me, it's not as entertaining. But all right, I'll leave that. But to the West. As our country moved west, of course, we found the Mexicans already there. Well, we fought a war with Mexico and drove the Mexicans out. Well, no, we put it this way. We drove the Mexican government out, but the Mexicans who were living there remained. And as we went west, we found a lot of Mexicans living there, and of course, a lot of Indians. And this brings us to a turbulent time of history, the time of the last of the Indian Wars. The Indian Wars for the United States began around 1610 when our Virginia settlers fought the Indians, and ended in 1890. Basically, they lasted almost 300 years for the people of the United States. Almost 300 years of Indian Wars. For Latin America, they lasted a bit longer. But the Indian Wars were finally ended in 1890. Now, Manifest Destiny, a doctrine I've talked about. Manifest Destiny. People people believed it was our God-given destiny to expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and we began to move in that direction. Today, I mean, nobody believes it, but then again, those people back then were quite a bit more religious than most of us are, and most of us today. And they believed that God had ordained that the United States to move to the west, so they began plowing to the west and opposing everything that stood in their path. The Indians, they were the victims. And again, now, buffalo. It is estimated that in 1800 there were probably 15 million buffalo that roamed the plains. The Plains Indians lived off of these buffalo. The buffalo provided them with meat, provided them with clothing, provided them with shelter. Yes, the Indians, I had a student ask me, what is a teepee? Teepees were the sticks that were arranged to make a tent. They were tied together with buffalo hides at the top. They had an opening here. The opening was easy. There was a flap that was easily closed. But the tent itself was made of buffalo skins sewn together using needles made of buffalo bones. And they also carried the water. Instead of carrying it in a canteen, they carried it with buffalo stomachs. They would oftentimes get the buffalo near a cliff, and then they would spook the buffalo to stampede the buffalo to run pell-mell over the cliff to their deaths, and then they would go down to the bottom of the cliff and collect the buffalo for their hides and their meat. But they did not kill the buffalo as much as the white man did. The white man moved in and began to shoot the buffalo just for the sheer game of it. A man was considered a buffalo hunter if he could kill 15 buffalo in one day. And they would just simply shoot them up for not even eat them, not even take their hides, just simply shoot them up. There's too many of them. Well, by the year 1890, they found out there was probably only 600 buffalo left, and finally, the federal government passed a law making buffalo hunting illegal. Now today we've got the numbers back up again, and some buffalo still roam the plains. Other buffalo have been corralled and put in farms, and a man here in Atlanta named Ted Turner makes a lot of money selling buffalo burgers or buffalo meat. Anyway, buffalo is making a comeback, but not so much for its hides as it is for its meat. But when the buffalo left, or when the buffalo almost left the Great Plains, it pushed the Indians into poverty. In fact, the appearance of the white man really impoverished the Indians a whole lot. Some of you, I'm going to name a couple of more famous Indians. There was Crazy Horse. There were actually a lot more, and Sitting Bull. There was also one named Rain in the Face and other ones, but these two Indians were some of the more famous Indian leaders who led the fight against the white man, and it was actually a one-sided fight. Now, folk, it wasn't that the Indians lacked guns. By this time, the Indians had the guns and knew how to use them. It wasn't that they lacked horses. They had already, by this time, become excellent horsemen. And a lot of the Spanish, as the Spanish would explore and die off, the Spanish would leave their horses behind as a lot of horses would get away. Well, the Indians captured these horses. The horse is one animal that can be tamed as an adult. The Indians would manage to capture these horses, tame them. They became excellent horsemen. The problem with the Indians, so they had two problems. Sheer lack of organization and sheer lack of numbers. The white man came in numbers that simply overwhelmed them, and just sheer numbers. Now, when I say organization, folk, you never hear of Indians described as being soldiers. Their fighters might be called braves, or might be called warriors. They were not soldiers. Now, I might have asked this class this before. What's the difference between a soldier and a person who merely fights?
Soldier trained.
Soldier is trained. A soldier fights as a team. You don't fight one without fighting them all. They fight together. The Indians' way of fighting was to fight one-on-one individually, pick a man who looks like he might be your size and hope he's not quicker and faster than you. And if he is, you might try to run, but if he's really fast, you're never going to run away from him. And sometimes you'd bite off more like a chew. Well, that was the way they fought. Pick on a man. Try to pick on someone who looks like he's smaller than you, but sometimes that'll fool you. He might be small in stature, but big in his ability to fight. But that was the way they fought, folk. Whereas the soldiers fought as a team. The Americans sent armies in there, and the armies trained fighting. Basically, the Indian way of fighting did not have a chance. The Indian from the beginning did not have a chance. Nevertheless, they tried. One of the biggest fights now is involving the Black Hills, and that fight is still going on today. Today, though, it's not over gold or money, but the Black Hills, all right, here's the story. The Indians were promised the Black Hills in a treaty called the Treaty of Fort Laramie. I'm not going to write it down, but the Indians were promised the Black Hills. Then gold was discovered in the Black Hills. The Black Hills now, folk, was utterly, totally worthless land. Now, I say worthless tongue-in-cheek because later gold and silver were found there. And then oil has been found in there recently. And the problem with getting the oil out is the Indians have the land as a result of a 1980 Supreme Court decision, which is one of the times I have to say it looks like the Supreme Court got it right. But now, it basically took the Indians some 100 years to get land that had been promised to in Fort Laramie. But some of the Indians did not accept the Supreme Court's decision, which gave them the land, and they continued to fight anyway. And if the fighting was, again, the fighting was suicide. Morally, they were fighting on high ground. Two reasons. Number one, the land had been theirs first. The second reason, and hear this from a white man, the white man was not keeping his treaties. The treaty at Fort Laramie, the white man broke as soon as he found there was gold in that region and they wanted it. The white man was not keeping his treaties, so the Indians had moral high ground for fighting. The other side, though, the fighting was sheer suicide. And again, like I said on the first day of class, if you think it was unfair, you've got to ask yourself, if you had been there, maybe you would not have gone in, but your brother would have. The white man came in such numbers that overwhelmed the Indian. Nobody, not even the other whites, could keep them out. Again, today it's different. Today we have the helicopter, the airplane, the internet, and even the drone today that we didn't have a few years ago. And these tools can help enforce the law. They didn't have that at the time. Well, the government began to send in troops to fight the Indians. White Cloud was the name of the Indians chieftain that was promised to that the Black Hills would be theirs. And one reason Red Cloud was when I was in the National Guard, our firing range was the range Red Cloud. We troops from the Georgia 48th Armored would fire our rifles at the Red Cloud, named after that chieftain. Nevertheless, Red Cloud was made a promise that the Black Hills would be the Indians, a promise that was conveniently broken. Now, most of the fights between white man and Indian were won by the white man, but there was one exception. In the 1840s in Cadiz, Ohio, if you've never heard of Cadiz, don't worry about it. The reason I've heard of it is my great-great-grandfather died there, lived there for the last years of his life, and died there. And I suppose he was there at the same time George Armstrong Custer was there, even though I don't know if he ever met Custer or not. Custer, from the very time he was a small boy, he would tell his parents, I want to be a soldier. I want to be a soldier. I want to be a soldier, over and over again. All his youth, Custer dreamed of immortal fame. One day, Custer said to his dad, I want to go to West Point. His dad said, no, well, yeah, I got a problem with that now, George. In the last election, I voted Republican, but the Democrat, James Buchanan, won, and I'm afraid that because the Democrats are in power, that they'll never take you into West Point. Custer applied anyway and got in. in spite of the fact his father had voted Republican, but he wanted to go in. He got to West Point. At West Point, he would run in the halls, he would pick fights. He did not keep his room clean, was generally untidy in appearance, finished right next to the bottom of his class. Basically, he was in fact, an incorrigible child. He got out, was supposed to arrest 2 men for fighting. He did not do it, so he himself was arrested for failing to do his duty. All this kept him out of the Civil War for a few weeks. He finally served his jail time. Then, because the Union Army needed officers desperately, in time of peace he probably couldn't have done it, he quickly worked his way up to general, because after all he'd been to West Point. He worked his way up to general. When he became general, he ordered the finest uniform the Army ever seen. The other generals hated him. They called him the boy general. He was younger than the other. He was the boy general with the golden curls. He let his blonde hair grow out long. Boy general with golden curls. He was resented, but he had victory after victory on the battlefield. He was in cavalry. He was in charge of a cavalry outfit. The Confederate cavalry general was General Jeb Stuart, whom they called Undefeated Jeb, because Jeb Stuart had not lost a battle. Well, Custer met Jeb Stuart at Gettysburg. Now, with all respects, Jeb Stuart's men had done a lot of hard riding, and they were tired. When they heard that there was a battle going on, they quickly went from Chambersburg to Gettysburg on a horse. And if you know anything about the geography of Pennsylvania, I mean, I lived in Waynesboro. Chambersburg is several miles from Gettysburg, and also that terrain is full of mountains, very mountainous. But anyway, Jeb Stuart's men rode hard to get to Gettysburg, and they met Custer, and Custer sent Jeb Stuart's men running through the woods. No more Undefeated Jeb. Custer started to follow Jeb's men when the men retreated towards the south, but General Meade was afraid that Custer would get himself destroyed for his over-brashness, so he called him back. And again, that's what happens, folks, if you're in an army and you decide, hey, I'm going to advance, and you leave the rest, you can easily get killed. It's happened to many a soldier, many a time. You have to stay with your men. So basically, General Meade was right in calling him back, but Custer was over-anxious. He never got his immortal fame during the Civil War. Well, he finally got it. He would not leave the Army when the Civil War was over, but he had to take a big demotion like almost all the officers did, because the Army did not need them as officers of that rank. So he took a demotion. He went out west to fight the Indians. Now, for some reason, folks, something happened that almost never happened. About 2,000 to 3,000 Indians got together. I mean, basically, I think the tribes accidentally bumped into each other, or somehow a bunch of them got together, and this was something that just simply did not happen. Most of your tribes were 200 or 300 Indians, just small little detachments. This time you had a big body of them. Custer was dimly aware of this, but again, he didn't know how many Indians there were. He split his army into 3 parts. One of them led by Reno, another one led by Benteen. Again, I've read this account many a time over, which he should not have done, but he split his army. He went out to scout the Indians, not to see how many there were, but to look over their girls, because each man hoped to get a girl when it was over. And I'm telling you the way it was. This was the way that Custer was fighting, not in accord with what the United States Army regulations called for. But while he was out there with his 277 men by himself, he found himself at a place called Little Bighorn. The Indians attacked. I did a report on this when I was in college, and an old Indian had been a child when this attack occurred, and the Indians, of course, were the only survivors, and they wouldn't talk. But finally, this old man did. He said that what the Indians did was they sent a detachment of 20 men who they all celebrated the night before because they knew they were going to die. But their job was to rush pell-mell without any regard for their life, just straight into the white man's army and get the white man thrown into the state of, while the white men were in a state of confusion, then the other Indians would attack. The strategy worked. These Indians rushed pell-mell and got the whites into a state of confusion. In the meantime, Custer realized he was hopelessly outnumbered. He sent messages to Benteen and Reno. Benteen and Reno saw the situation, knew they couldn't help him. Make a long story short, Officer Custer, I don't know what rank he had at the time, but Custer and all of his 277 men perished at once. The Indians went in, the battle was over, and they scalped all the men, except for Custer, who had married an Indian. They didn't scalp him, but to improve his hearing, They said, we want to send him in the next life with better understanding, so we want him to be able to understand us better. They drilled his ears wide open in hopes that would help him have more understanding of them and be able to hear better in the next life. Yeah, this actually went on. Well, when the whites finally came there, they found all 277 men. The congressional investigation was to last for a good many years, but George Armstrong Custer finally found the immortal fame he had always craved. His name has not been forgotten from that day till this. So he got his immortal fame, but not the way he wanted to. He got his immortal fame of being massacred, him and his entire men. Again, had he kept all three of his armies together, the outcome might have been different. Had he not been scouting around for the wrong reasons, the outcome might have been different also. And also had the Indians not bunched together. But here is the sad part about the Indians. They could not hold together, so they all scattered off into their various little tribes again. And the United States was able to defeat them piecemeal. Eventually, 13 years later, the Indians just got tired of fighting. Anyway, your book mentions after 60 years, the court battle lasted 60 years. The Supreme Court, after the case gone from one court to another, ruled in the Indians' favor that the Treaty of Fort Laramie had been violated, and the court said that there has hardly ever been a case of something more dishonorable dealings that you'll never find in American history. Maybe that's true. But the Sioux Indians to this day refused, and now there's a new issue coming up. Not just the issue of gold and silver, but the issue of oil. It's been found that there's enough oil in those Black Hills to where we could tell the Saudis and other countries, go home, we have all the oil we need, and we have more oil than we need or you need also. President Barack Obama would not allow the oil to be drilled. We'll see if the oil finally gets drilled. If any of you know anything about this, your input is welcome. But it's still an issue. The Sioux do not accept the Supreme Court's decision that they made 39 years ago. All right. Now, this event, by the way, is called Custer's Last Stand. The battle is the Battle of Little Bighorn. One of the few victories the Indians had in their long fight with the white man out west. Now, there were moves made to get the Indians off the reservation and get them assimilated. One move was to take the Indians, take them away from their reservations, put them in schools and educate them in the white man's ways, and teach them not only to read and write, but teach them arithmetic, but teach them to farm. And again, this did not work very well. They thought that they would improve the Indians, but the Indians began to have a problem they'd never known before. Problem with juvenile delinquency. The Indians began to use drugs, to drink alcohol, and again, alcohol has an effect on them that would be hilarious if it weren't so tragic. But the education did not necessarily work. They had a lot of their hair hacked off. They were doused with kerosene to kill the lice. Issued uniforms and shoes and all this to try to anglicize them. In Pennsylvania, there's a Carlisle Indian School, and again, Carlisle is a town near Harrisburg. I have been there myself. It's a Carlisle Indian School designed to mix the Indians with the whites. Now, the Dawes Allotment Act, folk try to understand, the Dawes Allotment Act was to take the Indians and give them 160 acres of land apiece. This sounds great, except the land they were given was really, really bad land. But maybe they could teach the Indians how to work this land, become farmers like the white people were, and raise cattle and sheep and whatever crops that they wanted to grow. The Indians, some of them were actually given this land. Here was a problem with it, folk. I challenge any of you to find any instance where that a group of people have been given land, free land, and they've prospered with it. They had to turn around right away and pass another law. I mean, after all, they've been given this free land. That meant any of it they sold to be a profit. So if they sold it for $1 an acre, they'd still be making profit. So they had to pass another law that the Indians, once given this land, had to hold it for 25 years and could not sell it for 25 years. But throughout history, there have been attempts made to give the poor land, and in every case, and your book says this here too, it makes the poor people poorer. The Chinese, the Tang dynasty and the Song dynasty, two dynasties back to back, tried to help the poor by government handout, and it brought down both dynasties. What's wrong with giving to the poor? Simply this: generally the poor don't know how to manage it. I say this with a lot of pain because I grew up in poverty, and I watched as my dad made bad decisions time after time with the money he had. He's not here to defend himself, so I feel bad about saying it, but folk, I know something about poverty. The way you don't help them, all right, the poor people have got to learn how to help themselves and not depend on a government handout. I see at least one head nodding in agreement. A lot of people feel, oh, it's up to government. Well, no, it isn't. It's up to me. And every one of you, in the sound of my voice, are going to find yourself in a situation at some point where that your obligations exceed your income. Don't panic. It happens to everybody. Guess who it happened to almost 40 years ago? Happened to a man named Donald Trump. In 1984, or maybe it was 83, Donald Trump found his net worth to be zero. What that means is he owed as much as he had. His debt equaled his assets. His net worth was zero. He pulled himself out of it. But, again, this happens to everybody. Everybody suffers a lot of economic losses and reverses in their lifetime. And hopefully you won't think you're an exception or this won't happen. Yes, it will. When it does, keep calm. You can make adjustments, get rid of some things you don't need, get another job. Whatever, try to better yourself economically, tighten your belt a little bit. You'll get through it. It's happened to me more than once. Yes?
So he didn't have help, like no one gave him a handout? Because you're saying that's...
Donald Trump did not take handout, did not get any handout. He got himself out of his economic mess.
Did he file bankruptcy?
That's true too, yeah. I'm not recommending that, but he filed bankruptcy at least 3 or 4 times.
That's helpful.
But not on his whole, it did not, no, let me hasten to state. He would file bankruptcy on part of his assets, like the ones that were not being profitable, he'd bankrupt them to where we wouldn't have to pay those debts.
That's a lot of help.
It's, yeah, yes, he did, yes, he did. Now, it is legal, and you can judge the man harshly if you want to, and a lot of people do, but yes, he did file bankruptcy 3 or 4 times on part of his assets to get out of paying part of his debts.
Right, so how would a poor person help themselves if they don't have assets to work?
Okay, this happened. You help yourself by starting with what you have, what resources you have. There's something you can do. It might be selling hamburgers, or it might be even flipping hamburgers. And I want to say this, folks. Every time I go to a restaurant, and I've been blessed with being able to go there pretty often, and I'll be going there now, every time you go there, there's a sign begging for workers. I see one person nodding your head that you've seen this yourself. You probably, maybe you've seen it. Now, if you don't want to do restaurant work, fine. I don't either. I worked at Crystal once. I worked at Shoney's once. The reason I am where I am today, folks, is I was willing to get my hands dirty. I mean, I got a master's degree and couldn't find work in the field of history, teaching history, so I hired at Lockheed. Spent 27 years doing manual labor. I'm not the least bit ashamed of that. Eventually, the break that I wanted came. I thought I'd never become a college teacher. And one day, the day was August 23rd. I got my master's degree 25 years ago today. Now, we had a cat stuck in a tree meowing away, and he couldn't get down. And eventually, he came down by himself. But there was, I went off to work late in the shift. My wife called me, "This is a dream come true. Georgia Perimeter College has called you. They want you to teach their class beginning this Saturday. That was on Wednesday. I said, I'm going to, oh, can't you come home here with the kid? No, I said, this is my, I'm going to have, I gotta go to college now. I went dressed in rags. But again, today's professors dress that way, but in those days, I felt kind of embarrassed. I didn't go to the college that way on Saturday. On Saturday, I was dressed up, but I was dressed for Lockheed. But I went to the college right here and met my boss and met the people I was going to be working with. And took Friday off so I could prepare a lesson. I prepared a lesson, got in front of the class and found out that they knew nothing.